on. Tanaiste, thank you very much for speaking at our Maple Leaf dinner this evening. Might just reflect a little bit on the evening and just ask you from a historical perspective and an economic perspective, perhaps you could reflect a little on the importance of the relationship between Canada and Ireland.
Well, I think if you look at the relationship historically, it's one that is really bound by a shared history and enormous family connections, whether it's ancient migrations 400 years ago from the southeast of Ireland to Tanaiste, or Newfoundland as it's called in English, to people who left after the famine and contributed to the Canadian population, to people, particularly young professionals and younger people now who are going to live in Canada. About 1 in 8 Canadians, I think, claim Irish heritage, which is more than in the US. So that relationship is, I think, very special and manifests itself in a lot of different ways. You know, even people in Quebecois who are in Quebec who are native French speakers who have Irish surnames, and then people in Newfoundland who have Irish accents. It's just an extraordinary form of migration. And I think that really speaks to the historical relationship. But in more recent years, it's been a political partnership, both very like-minded countries in terms of our views about how the world should work and climate action and free trade and so on. But also a deepening economic relationship, trade having gone up, I think maybe about 30% in the last 5 years. So a really good political, cultural and also economic relationship. Great.
One of the great stories I've heard as chair when we were traveling to Montreal a few years ago was there was this gentleman came up to me with a heavy Quebecois accent. He had red hair, you know, and his name is Sean Egan. And he spoke English with this and he was explaining to me that he was one of the descendants of one of the famine families came over, and the family let him keep the Egan name. So it is special when you think about that history. I suppose it's interesting. We both live next to very large economies relative to our own. We're both export-driven organizations or countries. We're both export-driven countries. And that's been part of our DNA. I mean, how do you see that relationship between Canada and the US and the similarities between Ireland and the UK?
Yeah, well, I think there are definite similarities. You know, Canada's a huge country, of course, geographically, but population is relatively small relative to the US with 300 million people and a massive economy and huge political power. We're something similar, 5 million people next door to the United Kingdom with 60, with a big economy, nuclear weapons, and a country with which we have a close relationship and a good relationship, but one that sometimes leads to misunderstandings. And I think because we're small relative to Britain, we understand them very well and know a lot about them. And in Canada, you understand the US very well and know a lot about them, watch their TV just like we watch British TV, and understand their cultural nuances. But sometimes they don't understand us so well. And I think that's kind of at the root of some of the misunderstandings. So there's a definite similarity there. But I think the strongest similarity between Ireland and Canada is that we do have a very similar attitude to how the world works around free trade and free enterprise, taking climate action and believing in multilateral systems like the UN as the best means to resolve disputes.
And certainly that's an ethos which Mr. Trudeau has followed as Prime Minister the last almost going on 8 years now. You have been a huge proponent for Ceta in your role responsible for the Department of Enterprise. You mentioned tonight that, of course, it was something that was worked into the coalition agreement, and it's something that's been endorsed by the government. There's been some challenges to it recently. Could we ask, on behalf of the Ireland-Canada Business Association, I don't think we need to, but can you reaffirm your commitment to Ceta and the importance that it will bring for both Ireland and Canada and the EU?
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, it's already been provisionally applied, so we're already seeing most of the benefits from that with tariff-free trade on so many different goods and a big increase in trade between Ireland and Canada in both directions. In terms of ratifying the agreement itself, we've a government commitment to do so. The barrier to that now at the moment is that it's been challenged in the courts as to whether or not we need a referendum. And I can't prejudice the outcome of that decision, but certainly it's the intention of the government to proceed with ratification if the court case determines that a referendum isn't required. But we have to wait for the outcome of that. And as you know, both France and Germany have run into some similar issues and haven't ratified yet. But as a principle, we'd always like to be a first mover or early mover when it comes to ratifying free trade agreements. So a little bit frustrated that we're kind of in the middle of the group at the moment, but determined to get that done as soon as we can.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for reaffirming that commitment. And I suppose one of the benefits of full ratification will be actually that the tariffs will be, I think, reduced even more.
Yeah, and permanently.
And permanently. And one thought I had to myself is I think it would go from 98 to 99 or 100%. You know, for some of these agricultural sector here in Ireland, which is important, which operate on very thin margins. You know, I wonder if that would make the difference between them making a decision or it being viable to export to Canada or not, just that 1% tariff. And so I think that's something that we have to do a little bit more work on. But I think that there's probably a case there that beef, sheep, some other agricultural products here are probably will be even more beneficial to the Irish enterprise if those tariffs come off completely.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, you know, often the agriculture sector in Ireland can be fearful of trade agreements. But Canada is actually one of the ones that can be very beneficial for our food industry. Very big market and the potential, I think, to export some more.
Well, one thing after living for 16 years in Ireland, I don't think any Irish businessman or business person has anything to fear around the world because they usually can out-hustle anybody else in the room.
It's worked for us so far. So.
Well, thank you very much and all the best.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot.